Hey everyone, I just read Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, and since it's a science fiction classic, and I know I have a lot of sci-fi fans here, I thought some of you might be interested in hearing what I thought of it. So here you go. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, also known just as The Body Snatchers, tells a now iconic story about a small town in California called Mill Valley, where people begin to suspect that their loved ones are not themselves. They look the same, sound the same, even act the same, but there's something off. When the local doctor begins to investigate, he discovers the existence of oversized pods, which are capable of producing a perfect copy of an individual. Jack Finney first published this story as a short work of fiction in 1954, and then he expanded it into a full-length novel, which was published in 1955. It has since been adapted for the big screen several times, in 1956 starring Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winter, in 1978 starring Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, in 1993 as Body Snatchers starring Gabrielle Anwar and Meg Tilly, and in 2007 as The Invasion starring Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig. The version of the book that I ended up getting from the library turned out to be a 1978 reissue, which includes some minor revisions that the author added. Well, he says they're minor. I don't know how minor they really are. I imagine this reissue was rolled out to coincide with the release of the Sutherland film. I don't know what Finney changed besides the year the action takes place. Since I was fully expecting it to be set in the 50s, I was definitely thrown off when the narrator, Dr. Miles Bennell, tells the reader on page 1 that the story begins in October of 1976. I'm not crazy about that change. It still reads like a 1950s story, kind of. It's pretty timeless, in a way. So I don't see that bringing the story 20 years into the future made any difference, except to make readers in the 70s feel like it was set in current times. There's also an inside joke that must have been added after the fact, where Miles mentions going to see a movie based on a book titled Time and Again by Jack Finney, which he published in 1970. It's a combination of a shameless plug and wishful thinking, I guess, since that book didn't actually get a movie deal. However, opening confusion aside, I enjoyed the book. I already knew the story, having seen the old film several times as a kid and the 70s one once, so it was interesting to keep track of what was familiar and what was not. It's been long enough since I've seen the old movie that there were actually some surprises, kind of, parts that I didn't expect, but then when they happened, I said, oh yeah, I remember this. I must say, I didn't expect to be scared. When I was 8 or 9 years old, the 1956 movie scared me. The idea of a pod showing up in our house and a copy of me, or a copy of my mom, or my dad, or one of my siblings appearing under foamy bubbles was disturbing, and for some reason I was most sure that a pod person would show up in the bathroom of all places. I was also afraid of seeing a tingler in the bathroom. But I'm not 8 or 9 years old anymore, so I should be good, right? Well, maybe not. I wound up reading a lot of this late at night, in bed, in the dark, and the whole thing about the body in the basement laying there and finding out it has no fingerprints, and the wife going down in the middle of the night to check to see if it had changed while her husband was sleeping, and fumbling overhead for the light switch. Suddenly it gave me the willies, and I definitely had a few of those things where, you're reading the book and then you slide it down and you look around the room and you're checking the shadows. Has anything moved? Is the door still closed? Is there anything over the side of the bed? Same thing with the other body in the basement, and I just felt like, what am I doing? I should not be reading this before I go to sleep. I have recurring dreams about basements. This is not good for me. There's another part later on I thought was quite good, where Miles eavesdrops on some people who have changed and hears them imitating him. These people who formerly were friends, and now they're repeating conversations they had with him and mocking him, mocking his voice, mocking what he said, and It's not scary per se, but it's a chilling moment. There's one aspect of it that's kind of funny. Throughout the book, there's this little romance developing between Miles and Becky, the woman who he went on a few dates with in high school, who's now re-entered his life. I don't mind the romance, it's fine. But there are a couple times when he gets distracted by his attraction to her and starts putting a move on, and it's like, dude, now's not the time! Finney paints a great picture of the state of the town of Mill Valley as Miles and Becky return and realize just how quiet and run down things are, the buildings and roads apparently neglected. Perception is influenced by imagination in that moment, and Miles describes what he's seeing as it might be portrayed in a work of art or a film. It sounds like a German expressionist nightmare, and in addition to being an eerie, descriptive passage, I like to imagine that Finney here was giving filmmakers a hint of how he would like an adaptation of the story to look at this point. How he would want this sequence portrayed. Alas, I don't believe any of the films have gone with his vision. Let's read it. I'll read it to you. It's on page 120 and 121 of this copy. I couldn't possibly describe any specific way in which anything I saw seemed different, yet things did, in a way words can't explain. But if I were an artist, painting the way Sycamore Street seemed to me, walking along now with Becky, I think I'd distort the windows of the houses we passed. I'd show them with half-drawn shades, the bottom edge of each shade curving downward, so that the windows looked like heavy-lidded, watchful eyes, quietly and terribly aware of us as we passed through that silent street. I'd show the porch rails and stair rails hugging the old houses like protective arms, sullenly guarding them against our curiosity. I'd paint the houses themselves as huddled and crouching, alien and withdrawn, resentful, evil, and full of icy malice against the two figures walking along the street between them. And somehow I depict the very trees and lawns, the street and sky above us, as dark, though it was actually clear and sunny, and give the picture a brooding, silent, fearful quality. And I think I'd make every color just a shade off-key. The book has a few slow spots dotted here and there, but overall the pacing is good and the tension is high. The last section in particular has good escalation and some creepy scenes, which I don't think made it into any of the films, at least not the ones that I've seen. There are two weaknesses in the final act. One, there's a chapter where a character talks for a long time, speculating on the pods and their origin, and he's kind of boring. Progress is further hampered when that character comes back a little later and talks some more. The other drawback is that the climax and resolution kind of fizzle. I had no idea what to expect at the end here because the two films I've seen have very different and famous endings. I was not expecting the way that this ended. It's surprisingly upbeat, and that was a bit of a disappointment. But the last paragraph does make up for it because it ends with a comment that recalls how the whole thing started. It kind of is a throwback to the opening lines, and it also echoes the way I feel about UFOs, cryptids, certain political conspiracy theories, so it struck a chord with me. With regard to the two film adaptations I've seen and how they compare to the book, I would say the 1956 film is very like the book in some parts, divergent in others. Specifically, the design of the pods I thought was spot on, although I don't know if Finney revised his descriptions in the reissue to make them more like the film. I don't know why he would do that. The 1978 film, as I remember it, is a looser adaptation with a lot more things added. The stuff I remember the most from that movie, the freaky dog and the screams, which I would try to imitate for you just for fun, but this is actually the second video that I'm filming today and I don't want to push it. Those are not in the book. Both films do something totally different with the ending, going for a shock factor designed to unnerve the viewer, which was quite effective in both cases. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is not a long book, and for the most part, it's an engaging read. It's not one of the most lauded titles in the realm of classic science fiction novels, but it is a concept that has worked its way into our pop culture, not just because of the successful film adaptations, but because it's just a good, scary premise. The disturbing idea of people you know being taken over and trying to get you to accept the same fate, the paranoia of never knowing if the person you're talking to is trustworthy or if they've been turned, and the desperation of not being able to go to sleep no matter how exhausted you are for fear that you'll be taken over by a pod person. So those are my thoughts on Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. I hope you enjoyed this review, and stay tuned for another video later this week. Thanks for watching.